The dusty auction barn hummed with the quiet murmurs of seasoned buyers, their eyes scanning catalog pages as they waited for the next lot. A routine Saturday for most, just another chance to find a bargain or make a profit. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of denim-clad ranchers and polished boots of wealthy estate owners, all united in their casual indifference until the double doors swung open and everything changed. The once majestic Appaloosa entered the ring, his coat dappled with spots that had faded over the years, his muscles still powerful beneath a frame that had known better days. But there was something in his eyes, something that made the casual chatter die in the throats of the onlookers, a fierce intelligence that seemed out of place in an auction ring. The handler tugged at the lead rope, expecting the usual circle around the perimeter, the practiced display of an animal resigned to its fate. But the Appaloosa had other plans, his hooves planted firmly on the dirt floor, his head raised with quiet defiance. The handler tugged again, harder this time, but the horse remained unmoved, like a statue carved from flesh and bone. The auctioneer cleared his throat nervously, unsure how to proceed with an animal that refused to be shown. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some annoyed at the delay, others amused by the unexpected disruption. A man in a black cowboy hat shook his head dismissively. Probably stubborn and worthless, he muttered to his neighbor. But a woman in the third row leaned forward, her brow furrowed in concentration. There was something about that horse, something more than simple stubbornness. The auction manager approached the ring, his face flushed with frustration as he barked orders at the handler, who now pulled with all his strength. The Appaloosa's muscles tensed, but his hooves remained rooted to that exact spot in the center of the ring, as if he were guarding something precious, something invisible to everyone else in the barn. Two more handlers entered the ring, approaching with whips and cattle prods, the crowd shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Nobody wanted to witness what might come next. But just as the situation threatened to escalate into something ugly, the Appaloosa turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping across the faces in the crowd, searching for something or someone with such focused intent that even the handlers paused their advance, struck by the unexpected intelligence in those dark liquid eyes. The auctioneer tried to salvage the situation, making a weak joke about stubborn horses, but his words fell flat in the heavy silence that had descended over the barn. The Appaloosa remained unmoved, his ears flicking forward then back, his nostrils flaring slightly, as if trying to catch a familiar scent among the dust and leather and sweat of the auction house. Those watching couldn't name the feeling that crept over them as they stared at this horse who refused to play his part. But something about his quiet defiance, his impossible stillness, touched something deep and forgotten in their hearts, something that would soon unravel into a story none of them could have imagined. 3 months before Eclipse stood frozen in that auction ring, spring had painted the small mountain farm in gentle greens and soft yellows. Morning light spilled across the worn wooden porch where Harold Mason sat in his rocking chair, weathered hands wrapped around a steaming mug. His eyes, faded blue beneath bushy white brows, followed the familiar silhouette of Eclipse grazing peacefully in the meadow below. The Appaloosa's spotted coat caught the sunlight as he lifted his head, ears pricked toward the old man as if they shared a silent conversation across the distance. Harold and Eclipse had weathered 23 winters together, their lives intertwined like old tree roots beneath the soil. The horse had come to him as a spirited 3-year-old, unwanted by others for his stubborn streak. But Harold had recognized something in those intelligent eyes, a kindred spirit, equally uncompromising and loyal. Together, they had worked the mountain trails, Harold's gentle hands never raising a whip, his voice the only guidance Eclipse ever needed. The meadow below the cabin still held the faint outlines of the training ring, where Harold had taught Eclipse to dance, not for show or competition, but for the pure joy of movement. The old man would whistle soft mountain tunes, while the Appaloosa performed his elegant steps, their shared rhythm, a language only they understood. Neighbors sometimes gathered to watch, amazed at how the massive horse moved with the delicate precision of a creature half his size, responding to cues so subtle they seemed imagined. When winter storms buried the farm in snow, Eclipse would stand beside Harold's bedroom window each morning, waiting for the curtain to part. During the worst blizzard 10 years back, the horse had broken free from his stable, trudging through chest-deep drifts to reach the cabin when Harold's generator had failed. The old man woke to find Eclipse standing guard outside, refusing to leave until help arrived. That spring morning, Harold set his coffee mug down, a strange sensation crawling through his left arm. Eclipse lifted his head sharply from across the meadow, his entire body suddenly alert. The horse broke into a gallop toward the cabin, just as Harold's vision blurred. By the time the old man crumpled against the porch railing, Eclipse was already calling out, his desperate whinny echoing across the valley, summoning a neighbor who found Harold collapsed on the weathered boards. In the chaos that followed, Eclipse watched from beyond the fence line, his eyes never leaving the ambulance as it carried Harold away. The paramedics hadn't understood why the old man kept reaching toward the window, his speech slurred beyond recognition. Days became weeks as distant relatives arrived, speaking in hushed tones about care facilities and estate sales. Eclipse was led away by strangers, his head turning back toward the empty porch, searching for the silhouette that had been his constant for over 2 decades, his ears straining for a whistle that no longer carried across the morning air. The tension in the auction barn stretched like an over-tightened wire as Eclipse continued his silent protest. The initial confusion had given way to frustration, the schedule falling further behind with each passing minute. The lead handler wiped sweat from his brow, embarrassment turning to anger as he signaled for reinforcements. 2 burly men entered the ring, determination hardening their features as they approached from opposite sides, ropes ready to force compliance from the stubborn Appaloosa. Eclipse sensed their intentions, his muscles rippling beneath his faded coat, his ears pinned back against his head, a warning that went unheeded as the men closed in. The Appaloosa shifted his weight, not in preparation to move, but to brace himself more firmly on that exact spot of dirt and sawdust that held him transfixed. First man lunged, attempting to secure a second lead around Eclipse's neck, while the other moved behind with a riding crop raised. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, some standing for a better view of the unfolding drama, others turning away in discomfort. Eclipse snorted, his breath coming in heavy clouds as he resisted, throwing his head up sharply when the crop came down near his hind legs. The sudden motion caused something to dislodge from his mane, something that had been carefully tucked between the coarse strands near his withers. A small rectangular object fluttered down, spinning through the dusty air before landing in the ring's center, just between Eclipse's front hooves. The photograph lay face up on the ground, its edges worn and colors faded, yet the image remained clear enough. A younger Harold standing proudly beside Eclipse, both facing the camera with identical expressions of dignified contentment. The old man's hand rested on the horse's neck, in exactly the spot where the photo had been hidden. No one in the audience seemed to notice the fallen picture, their attention fixed on the escalating struggle. The auction manager now entered the ring himself, gesturing wildly as he ordered someone to fetch a tranquilizer gun. Eclipse's eyes rolled white at the edges, his chest heaving with effort, but his hooves remaining planted, as if rooted through the floorboards into the very earth below. Only one person saw the photograph fall. Liam Parker, a 19-year-old auction assistant stationed near the ring entrance, caught the movement from the corner of his eye. Something about the deliberate way Eclipse positioned himself over the picture, almost protectively, made Liam pause. The boy's brow furrowed as he watched the horse's gaze repeatedly drop downward, then scan the crowd, as if trying to communicate something beyond the understanding of everyone present. While the handlers regrouped for another attempt, Liam edged closer to the ring, his eyes fixed on the mysterious photograph beneath Eclipse's shadow. The Appaloosa's ears suddenly swiveled forward, focusing intently on the young man's approach. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the chaos of the auction ring, a connection forming in the space between heartbeats. Eclipse's ears flicked forward, then back, an acknowledgement that left Liam with the unsettling feeling that this wasn't just stubbornness or fear. The horse was waiting for something, or someone, with a purpose that ran deeper than anyone realized. The auction manager's voice boomed through the barn, ordering everyone to clear the ring, his patience worn thinner than old leather. After 30 minutes of failed attempts, the handlers retreated, grateful for the reprieve, their faces flushed with exertion and wounded pride. Eclipse remained unmoved, his spotted coat darkened with sweat, but his determination undiminished. As the crowd buzzed with speculation and complaints, Liam hesitated at the edge of the ring, his eyes fixed on the photograph lying in the dirt. The auction house was emptying temporarily, bidders stepping outside for fresh air or wandering to the concession stand while the staff regrouped. In the momentary lull, Liam slipped under the barrier and approached cautiously, his lanky frame tense with nervous energy. Eclipse watched the young man, ears alert but not pinned back in the warning stance he had shown the handlers. The distance between them closed with each careful step, until Liam stood just beyond reach of those powerful hooves. He crouched slowly, extending his arm to retrieve the photograph without taking his eyes off Eclipse. The horse lowered his head slightly, nostrils flaring as he caught Liam's scent, but made no move to intervene as the young man's fingers closed around the worn paper. Standing again, Liam studied the image in his trembling hands. The elderly man's face was kind but weathered, deep lines etched around eyes that sparkled with quiet joy. Beside him stood Eclipse, younger and more vibrant, his dappled coat gleaming in sunlight. Between them, a small girl with wild curls and missing front teeth grinned up at the camera, one hand clutching the old man's fingers and the other buried in Eclipse's mane. Something about the girl's face struck Liam as hauntingly familiar. He turned the photograph over, finding faded handwriting across the back. Harold, Eclipse, and Sarah, Mason Farm, summer 2010. Liam's pulse quickened as connections formed in his mind. Harold Mason. The name had appeared in the local paper just months ago. The stroke victim whose property had been sold to cover medical expenses. The elderly craftsman whose hand-carved furniture was prized throughout the county. With newfound purpose, Liam stepped closer to Eclipse, moving with the gentle assurance of someone approaching a friend, rather than a stubborn auction lot. The horse's eyes tracked his movement, intelligent and assessing, but without the fear or aggression he had shown others. Liam extended his open palm, offering the photograph for Eclipse to see. The Appaloosa's nostrils fluttered over the image, his breath warming Liam's skin. Liam leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper, as his lips moved close to Eclipse's ear. The words were meant for the horse alone, a quiet acknowledgement of understanding that traveled between them like an electric current. Eclipse's reaction was immediate and profound, his ears pricking sharply forward, his entire body seeming to lighten as if a great weight had been lifted. For the first time since entering the ring, the horse shifted his weight, turning his head to look directly into Liam's eyes with such profound recognition that the young man felt something catch in his throat. From across the ring, the auction manager stared in disbelief as the impossible connection unfolded before him, unaware that what he was witnessing was not just a momentary breakthrough, but the beginning of something far more extraordinary than he could possibly imagine. The auction manager stalked toward the ring, tranquilizer gun gripped tightly in his weathered hand, his patience exhausted and schedule in shambles. Bidders were returning to their seats, drawn by whispers of the impending intervention their expressions a mix of morbid curiosity and uncomfortable anticipation. Liam stood protectively beside Eclipse, the photograph clutched in his trembling fingers as the manager approached with determined strides. Liam's voice rose above the murmurs, asking for just 5 more minutes, his words tumbling out in a desperate rush that made the manager pause briefly before shaking his head. The business of the auction couldn't wait for sentimentality or mysteries, not with 20 more horses to sell before sundown. The tranquilizer gun raised slowly, its metal gleaming under the harsh barn lights. Something made Liam look down at that crucial moment, his attention drawn to the exact spot where Eclipse's hooves remained planted. The floorboards there seemed different somehow, worn in a pattern unlike the surrounding area. He crouched suddenly, brushing away layers of sawdust and dirt with his palm, revealing a section of wood that had been polished by thousands of feet over decades. But at its center lay a small dark circle no larger than a quarter. Realization washed over Liam's face as he remembered stories his grandmother had told, tales of the auction barn's history before horses and cattle filled its halls. This building had once been the community gathering place, hosting dances and celebrations that brought the Mountain families together across generations. His fingers traced the circular mark, recognition dawning as he connected fragments of local history with the photograph in his hand. The dark circle was a burn mark, left when old Harold Mason had dropped to one knee 53 years earlier, nervously fumbling a lit candle as he proposed to Elizabeth Cooper during the harvest dance of 1971. The story had become part of local legend, the young carpenter so overcome with emotion that he'd nearly set the place ablaze, leaving a permanent reminder scorched into the wooden floor. Eclipse had been standing directly over this spot since entering the ring, refusing to move as if anchored to this physical connection to his owner's past. The horse wasn't being stubborn. He was maintaining a vigil, somehow sensing the significance of this exact location through means beyond human understanding. Liam rose slowly, turning toward the auction manager with the burn mark at his feet and the weathered photograph extended in his hand. His words came more confidently now, explaining the connection between horse and history, pointing to the elderly man in the photograph and then to the floor beneath Eclipse's hooves. The manager's expression shifted from irritation to uncertainty, the tranquilizer gun lowering slightly as the story unfolded. Eclipse remained motionless, but his eyes followed Liam intently, ears forward, as if confirming each word. Around them, the audience grew quieter, the initial frustration giving way to something softer as the pieces came together. An elderly woman in the third row removed her glasses, wiping them clean before leaning forward to study the horse with newfound interest, her own memories stirring. The manager's grip on the tranquilizer gun loosened, his weathered face softening almost imperceptibly as he looked between Eclipse and the burn mark revealed beneath decades of auction dust. Some things demanded respect, even in a business built on efficiency and profit, and the connection between an old man's love story and his faithful horse's unwavering devotion was becoming difficult for even the most pragmatic heart to ignore. The auction continued without Eclipse, the manager reluctantly announcing a postponement until tomorrow as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Liam slipped away while handlers led other horses through the ring, the photograph burning a question in his pocket that needed answering. The auction office was quiet, just a tired clerk filing paperwork who barely glanced up as Liam approached with carefully constructed casual questions about lot number 43. The clerk's answers came between distracted sips of lukewarm coffee, revealing more than intended. Harold Mason, stroke victim, no family stepping forward, medical bills mounting, Riverside Care Facility handling the arrangements. Eclipse would be sold tomorrow. No exceptions, the proceeds already earmarked for outstanding medical costs. The conversation ended with a pointed reminder that auction employees weren't paid to get attached to the merchandise. Liam's truck rumbled beneath him as he drove across town during his break. The care facility's bland exterior, rising from manicured shrubs like an institutional afterthought. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as a night nurse eyed him suspiciously, her initial resistance melting when Liam produced the photograph. Explaining his connection to Harold's beloved horse, her expression softened as she revealed that Harold hadn't spoken a word since his stroke, hadn't responded to therapy, barely acknowledged visitors beyond empty stares. She led Liam down a quiet hallway into a simple room where Harold Mason sat near the window, his once powerful frame diminished beneath a blue cardigan, eyes fixed on the darkening sky outside. The nurse placed the photograph in the old man's unresponsive hands before leaving them alone. Liam knelt beside the wheelchair, speaking softly about Eclipse, about the auction ring, about the burned spot on the floor that told a love story. For just a moment, something flickered in Harold's vacant gaze, a ghost of recognition that disappeared as quickly as it had come. Outside, the facility grounds stretched to a wooded boundary, with Harold's ground floor room facing a small garden area with a service gate, perfect for what Liam now planned. A text message to his cousin, who worked night security at the auction house, was answered with reluctant agreement. The pieces fell into place with surprising ease, as if guided by forces beyond Liam's understanding. Midnight found Liam leading Eclipse quietly across the care facility's dew-damp lawn, the moon casting their shadows in elongated silhouettes across perfectly trimmed grass. The Appaloosa moved without hesitation, following Liam with a trust that belied their brief acquaintance, his hooves making barely a sound on the soft earth. The service gate hinges protested briefly before yielding to oil Liam had applied hours earlier during his reconnaissance. The garden outside Harold's room was small but private, surrounded by tall hedges that shielded them from the parking lot and main entrance. Liam tapped gently on the window, where the same compassionate nurse waited inside. She eased Harold's wheelchair onto the concrete patio, positioning him beneath the moonlight before retreating inside, her silhouette visible through the curtains as she stood guard against unexpected rounds. Eclipse stood at the garden's edge, his spotted coat silver in the moonlight, ears pricked forward and nostrils flaring as he caught a familiar scent on the night air. Liam held his breath as the horse took a step forward, then another, approaching the motionless figure in the wheelchair with deliberate care. What happened next would remain etched in Liam's memory forever, a moment of connection so profound that even the night itself seemed to hold its breath in witness. Eclipse moved forward with careful steps, his ears pricked toward the motionless figure in the wheelchair. The moonlight bathed the garden in silver, turning the horse's dappled coat into a canvas of shadows and light. Harold remained still, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the garden walls, giving no indication that he was aware of the magnificent creature approaching him. Liam held his breath, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake, if this midnight mission would end in disappointment and heartbreak. The Appaloosa stopped just short of Harold, lowering his great head until his muzzle was level with the old man's hands resting lifeless in his lap. Eclipse's breath came out in warm clouds against the cool night air, stirring Harold's fingers like a gentle awakening. For a long moment, nothing happened, the world suspended in that fragile space between hope and reality. Then Eclipse made a soft, nickering sound, so quiet, it might have been the whisper of leaves in the gentle breeze. He pressed his muzzle against Harold's palm, the same way he had done thousands of times over their years together. Harold's fingers remained motionless, but Eclipse persisted, nudging gently, patiently, his eyes never leaving the old man's face. Behind the window, the nurse watched with tears gathering in her eyes, her hand pressed against her mouth. Liam stood frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid to shatter the delicate moment unfolding before him. The night seemed to hold its breath along with him, the crickets falling silent, the wind stilling among the leaves. Eclipse shifted closer, his massive body moving with surprising grace until his head rested against Harold's shoulder. The horse exhaled deeply, and with that breath came a truth that Liam suddenly understood with absolute clarity. Eclipse hadn't been refusing to move at the auction because of stubbornness or fear. He had recognized the building, the auction barn where Harold had proposed to Elizabeth all those decades ago, where their life together had begun, where young Harold had brought his bride to community dances long before it became a place of commerce. Eclipse had been searching for his owner's scent in the exact spot where Harold and Elizabeth had started their journey. The burn mark on the floor wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was the anchor point of a love story that Eclipse had somehow been part of, even generations later. The horse had been maintaining a vigil, standing guard over a memory he couldn't possibly understand yet somehow knew in the deepest part of his being. A sound broke the silence, so faint that Liam almost missed it. Harold's lips had parted, a single syllable escaping like a prayer. His right hand twitched, fingers uncurling with painful slowness. Liam watched in awe as those weathered fingers lifted, trembling with effort, to touch Eclipse's muzzle. The connection completed, like a circuit closing, bringing light where there had been darkness. Eclipse remained perfectly still, allowing the fragile touch, his eyes half closed in what could only be described as contentment. Harold's fingers moved with growing certainty, tracing the white blaze that ran down the horse's face, finding the familiar path they had traveled countless times over 23 years together. The nurse appeared silently at Liam's side, her clipboard forgotten, medical objectivity abandoned in the face of the miracle unfolding in the moonlit garden. She whispered that in all her years of elder care, she had never seen anything like this. A man finding his way back from the darkness through the power of a connection that transcended words, that reached beyond the broken pathways of speech, to touch something fundamental and unbreakable. The story of Eclipse's stand at the auction and midnight reunion spread through the small mountain community like wildfire, jumping from person to person with the speed that only small-town news can travel. The auction manager, moved despite his practical nature, shared the tale over coffee at the local diner. The compassionate nurse whispered it to her colleagues during shift change. Liam's cousin, who had helped orchestrate the midnight visit, couldn't keep the story to himself after witnessing Harold's first responsive moments in months. By sunrise, the narrative had evolved with each telling, gathering emotional weight and significance as it traveled. Eclipse was no longer just a stubborn auction horse, but a symbol of unwavering loyalty. His refusal to leave that sacred spot transformed into an act of devotion that transcended human understanding. Photographs of the burn mark on the auction floor circulated on local social media, accompanied by sepia-toned images of the harvest dances held there half a century earlier. The story reached beyond the county lines, picked up by regional news outlets, always hungry for heartwarming tales. A feature article included the photograph of Harold Eclipse and the little girl with wild curls and missing front teeth. The image, reprinted in crisp black and white, stared back at Sarah Mason from her laptop screen as she sat in her Chicago apartment, the coffee in her hand growing cold with shock. Sarah hadn't spoken to her grandfather in 15 years, their relationship fractured by youthful rebellion and the stubborn pride that ran deep in Mason blood. She had left the mountain community at 18, determined to escape what she saw as a limiting small-town existence. The distance between them had grown with each passing year, fed by misunderstandings and the silence that eventually became easier than reconciliation. She hadn't known about the stroke, hadn't known about the farm being sold, or Eclipse being sent to auction. The realization hit her with physical force, bringing her to her knees on the polished hardwood of her urban apartment. The memories came rushing back, summers spent on the farm, learning to ride on Eclipse's broad back while her grandfather walked alongside, his hand never leaving the saddle, until he was sure she was secure. 24 hours later, Sarah's rental car crunched over the gravel parking lot of Riverside Care Facility. She sat motionless behind the wheel, her knuckles white with tension, her reflection in the rearview mirror revealing a woman caught between her sophisticated city persona and the mountain girl with wild curls who had never truly disappeared. Liam was waiting at the entrance, having received her desperate message the night before. He led her not to Harold's room, but to the garden where Eclipse now spent his days. The auction manager had made an unprecedented decision to withdraw the horse from sale, moved by public sentiment and private conscience in equal measure. A hastily arranged sponsorship program now covered Eclipse's care, allowing him to remain as a therapy animal at the facility where his presence had already worked one miracle. Sarah froze at the garden entrance, her breath catching at the sight of Eclipse standing beside her grandfather's wheelchair. The horse's ears flicked forward at her approach, his intelligent eyes assessing this new yet somehow familiar visitor. Harold sat more upright than he had in months, his gaze clearer though still limited by the stroke's damage. Eclipse nickered softly, the same greeting he had offered Sarah every summer morning of her childhood. The sound broke something inside her, crumbling the walls built over 15 years of absence. She moved forward with halting steps, her designer boots sinking into the soft earth of the garden, the distance between who she had become and who she had been closing with each footfall. The morning sun poured through the windows of Harold's room, painting golden stripes across his bed where Sarah sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his. The words came slowly at first, his voice rough from months of silence, each syllable a mountain climbed. My Sarah. Those first two words hung in the air between them, precious and perfect, drawing gasps from the nurses who had gathered in the doorway to witness the impossible. Harold's speech remained limited, fragmented by the stroke's damage, but the dam had broken. With each passing day, more words emerged, carried on determination and love stronger than medical prognosis. Eclipse became a fixture at Riverside, his presence drawing other patients from their rooms, his gentle nature working small miracles among those who had retreated from the world. The physical therapists incorporated him into their sessions, watching in amazement as patients pushed themselves harder when the Appaloosa stood waiting at the end of the walking rails. Harold's progress outpaced everyone's expectations, his desire to communicate with Sarah and Eclipse providing motivation that no clinical intervention could match. Word reached the auction manager through Liam, who had become a regular visitor to Riverside. The manager sat quietly in his office, turning over the event that had disrupted his carefully ordered world, the horse that had refused to move from a spot of historical significance. Only he seemed to remember. Sentiment wasn't part of the auction business, but sometimes even the most practical hearts find themselves changed by unexpected grace. The decision came suddenly, but felt inevitable. The auction would be suspended for one Saturday evening. The building returned to its original purpose as a community gathering place. Decades of sawdust and commerce would give way to music and memory, honoring the love story that had begun on that worn wooden floor with a dropped candle and a nervous proposal. The night of the dance arrived crisp and clear, stars scattered across the mountain sky like diamonds on velvet. The auction barn stood transformed, hay bales arranged around the perimeter, strings of soft lights draped from the rafters. At the center, the burn mark on the floor had been carefully preserved, a small circle of history amid the polished wood. Harold arrived in his wheelchair, Sarah at his side, his frail body dressed in his best shirt. Elizabeth was long gone, having passed peacefully in her sleep 5 years earlier, but her presence filled the barn, alive in the memories shared by those who had known her. Neighbors and community members filled the space, drawn by the story that had touched something universal in their hearts. Eclipse entered last, led by Liam, but walking with the dignified assurance of one who belongs. The crowd parted naturally, creating a path to the center where the burn mark waited. The Appaloosa moved forward without hesitation, taking his position over the exact spot where he had stood unmovable weeks earlier. This time, however, he was not a horse refusing to leave, but a guardian choosing to stay, watching over the family and community that had formed around him. The music began, gentle at first, then swelling to fill the barn with melodies from a half-century ago. Sarah helped Harold to his feet, supporting his weight as they took small, careful steps together. Around them, couples of all ages joined the dance, creating concentric circles of movement with Eclipse and the Mason family at the center. 3 generations moved together as cousins Sarah hadn't seen in years arrived with their children, the family fractured by time and distance finding its way back to wholeness. As the evening deepened, Harold stood supported between his granddaughter and his faithful horse, one hand on Sarah's shoulder, the other resting on Eclipse's mane. In that perfect moment of connection, the boundaries between past and present, between human and animal understanding, between brokenness and healing all dissolved, leaving only the truth that had been there all along. Some bonds cannot be broken, some hearts refuse to forget, and sometimes the most profound loyalty is expressed not through grand gestures, but through simply refusing to move from the place where love began. Thank you for watching this incredible story of loyalty, love, and healing. If you were touched by Eclipse and Harold's journey, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories about the incredible bond between horses and humans. I appreciate each and every one of you joining me today, and I'll hope to see you in the next video.